Good evening. Welcome to your quickest history lesson, Cinema Horror. I'm Michael Barbee. Gonna start here with the inception of the horror movie, where it came from. It started with Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley, and Bram Stoker with their ideas of Dracula, Frankenstein, and just the psychology of what terrifies people. The fantastic ideas and psychology that these three put into their work laid the foundation for many different films. Edgar Allan Poe, several of his poems and stories were turned into actual films. Mary Shelley, dozens and dozens of different renditions of the Frankenstein monster. And Bram Stoker, well, you got Bram Stoker's Dracula, and pretty much every Dracula that has ever been conceived is somehow based off this man's stories. Since we're on the topic of Frankenstein and Dracula, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to the 30s. 30s is when all these great creatures came out on the silver screen in the way we remember them. Bela Lugosi, Dracula, Boris Karloff, Frankenstein, and the Mummy. You had the appearance of the Invisible Man, as well as werewolves. This was a great time to cement your place in horror history. Moving on to the early 40s, low budget films took over, blending horror and pulp sci fi films together. For movies like The Thing, Creature from the Black Lagoon, or more notably sci fi movies, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This would slowly push out the creatures from the 30s, but not completely out of memory. This trend would continue into the mid to late 50s. In the 60s, censorship rules started changing. Films were able to get more psychological, more sexual, more graphic. This was also the era where creatures of myth and sci fi were being replaced. These films started shifting its villain to the human element. Alfred Hitchcock, for example, created the movie Psycho. His main character, Norman Bates, showed that man could be the most horrifying creature as he was cemented into a reality that you and I could face at any time. For time's sake, I'm going to point out the 70s through the 90s altogether. Great time for film as far as bringing back the classic creatures, Frankenstein, Dracula, as well as a big start of a zombie boom thanks to George A. Romero. Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead. Amazing time. And as the film process started getting better and better, we saw these things explode as far as reality and realism. The creature shops and special makeups made this a great time to be a fan of these movies. Came out with movies like the Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th movies, which are now iconic movies and cult classics. 2000s through current. This is a big time for torture porn. Yes, torture porn. That's a term coined by David Idleston of the New York Magazine in reference to movies like Saw, Hostel, all the gruesome Texas Chainsaw Massacre style stuff we see today. Hope you enjoyed your quickest history lesson, Cinema Horror. Once again, I'm Mike Barbee. Hope you have a great evening.